In 2023, a man passed away inside his own home, left lying lifeless on the floor for days before anyone realized what had happened. Yet it wasn't his mysterious death that shocked the town most. It was what followed after his burial, a terror that still grips the place today. A new story, as always. Strange, unpredictable, and full of mysteries you'll never see coming. But one thing I can promise, you're going to enjoy every moment, and I guarantee you haven't heard it anywhere else. So don't forget to drop a like, my friend, and leave a comment as bright as your smile. Let's start today's episode. Peace be upon you. I'm Ahmed with a new and strange episode that I am sure you will enjoy. Today we have stories from followers, so if you have a story you'd like to share, you can send it to the Instagram account appearing on the screen. The first story is from Omar from Algiers, the capital city. Omar says he works in a painting company that transforms the walls of homes and buildings. His team often takes over an entire neighborhood at once, finishing house after house before shifting their brushes to a new district. In 2023, we landed a project in Iraqi, a whole row of apartment buildings all lined up on the very same street. Strangely enough, every single one of them needed painting and repairs at the same time. Odd, right? But with the sea so close by, we figured the salty air must have taken its toll on certain buildings, especially those built in a particular way. We gathered our equipment and headed to the work site, which happened to be right across from the Dolly Ibrahim cemetery. And no, Dolly Ibrahim isn't a name of a woman called Dolly. It's more like saying Mr. Ibrahim. Anyway, once we stepped into the site, we were stunned to find parts of the walls darkened, covered with a strange black mold. Surprised, we immediately began tackling the infestation, while also restoring the walls with a fresh coat of paint. 2 days later, we moved on to the neighboring site to continue the work. To our surprise, the same mold we had found in the previous building showed up again, spread across certain walls of this second one in almost the exact same way. The common factor? It was always on the ground floor. That struck me as odd because this kind of mold doesn't usually appear just from moisture. To satisfy my curiosity, I asked one of the building's residents about the strange black mold. He was an elderly man who had lived there for many years. He told me, "This mold shows up every year. We clean it, paint over the walls, and yet it always comes back exactly the same. Scientifically, people say it's caused by humidity, but then again, there are houses and buildings even closer to the sea that never see this kind of mold." We believe the real cause of his presence traces back to an incident buried deep in the past in one of the buildings. When I asked the man what had happened, he said it was in the third building, just beside ours. Decades ago, an old man lived there with his young wife, an aged husband paired with a bride far too young. The man owned an apartment on the ground floor of the building and several more in the neighboring blocks. In fact, across the 9 buildings lined up on this very street, he held nearly 10 ground floor flats, all of which he rented out. As for himself, he lived in the third building right next to ours. I asked him what the connection was between this matter and the black mold. The man said that one day, the residents of this neighborhood witnessed a horrible scene. The elderly man was found dead inside his apartment, alone. The strange thing was that he had been dead for a while, and no one knew about it until his body decomposed and rotted, and a very foul smell spread in the place. At that time, we discovered that this man had passed away. People also noticed the presence of black mold on the wall that was adjacent to the man's body. As for how he died, it is said that his wife used some dark magic to kill him and inherit his properties. Indeed, that's what happened, but God knows best. To be fair, the autopsy confirmed it was a natural death. His wife wasn't around and no one knew where she was, or where she might be now, but what made us suspect her involvement was the timing. She had already put one of their apartments up for sale before we even discovered her husband was dead. In other words, she seemed to know he was gone, and that by law, everything would soon be in her name. She put the cart before the horse, listing the property before the ownership had even transferred. But despite all the talk, there was never any solid proof that she had anything to do with his death. Once the apartments were legally transferred to the wife, she sold them off. People bought them at a fair price through a brokerage firm. When we purchased ours, we never even saw her. She didn't show up at all. Yet ever since then, mold has begun to creep back onto the same wall, the one right next to where the man had died. Strangely enough, the mold began spreading through all 10 apartments he once owned. It even crept onto nearby walls. And unless the walls were treated and repainted, the mold kept growing, reaching further and further. Meanwhile, the poor man lay buried in the cemetery, yet not once did we see his young wife visit his grave. In fact, we never really saw her, neither before nor after his death. It was as if she had married him only for his money, and once he was gone, she vanished completely. Omar recalls, when I first heard those words, a strange chill of fear crept over me, but then I thought, well, it made sense. The young woman had married an old man, surely for his fortune and estates. After all, she was said to be strikingly beautiful, while he was utterly alone. No children, no family. Why else would she marry him? Not for love, but for his wealth. We finished the job in that building and moved on to the third one. The very building where that incident happened. As soon as we stepped into the first apartment on the ground floor, I felt a sick knotting sensation. And the walls looked as if they'd been stained with black mold, far worse than the neighboring units. I realized then that this was the flat where that man had died, and it had been abandoned ever since. While I worked there, I had the unnerving sense that someone was watching me. And sure enough, things did occur. And events you'll be hearing about soon. Anyway, we wrapped up and moved on to the fourth building. If you think my story and that man's fate are strange, listen to my friend's tale next. The second story, because he witnessed things so bizarre they defy description. This second account belongs to Ayub, Omar's friend, the same Omar from the first story. Think of it as a sequel, but not quite. Almost a continuation, yet from another perspective. Ayub introduces himself. I'm Algerian as well, and I've worked alongside Omar for many years. What I experienced happened in the same district where Omar and I once worked, Chiraga, opposite the Dolly Ibrahim cemetery. That's where I first heard of the old man who died in his flat, leaving the walls stained with black mold. And that's exactly where my story begins. We kept working until we reached the third building, more precisely the ground floor apartment, the apartment of the old man. My friend Omar was on the day shift with 4 other workers, while I toiled alongside another crew of 4 at night. The company ran on 2 shifts to speed up the project, the morning shift from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and the evening shift from 5 p.m. until midnight. That day, the moment I accepted the assignment in this apartment and heard Omar's tale, a heavy dread settled in my chest. But business is business. We lit up the place, and it became clear. This was the one apartment the man could never sell. No matter who came to see it, no one stayed. The mold always returned, invasive and merciless. Yet the neighbors had no choice but to cover it up again and again, desperate to keep the rot from infecting the rest of the building. As you already know, no one really knows anything about the apartment's owner, the wife, so the tenants of the building are always the ones dealing with the mold, which, if left unchecked, creeps up the walls and threatens the structure itself. We began the work, each worker assigned to a different room. Unluckily for me, my task was to handle the mold in that cursed room, the one where the husband had died. At first, I didn't care much, but as soon as I started, I couldn't shake off the heavy feeling that I was being watched. Just a hunch, yet far too strong to ignore. I kept working with my headphones on, listening to anything online just to stay distracted and avoid focusing too much. Time passed faster that way, and before I knew it, the clock struck 8 after sunset. I sat down to eat, taking a short break when I noticed something strange. While eating, I'd suddenly drift off, lose focus, then snap back only to realize a big portion of my food had disappeared. I found myself wondering, did I really eat that much? And when exactly did I do it? A quick glance at the clock showed more than 10 minutes had passed, even though it felt like I had only just taken my first bite. So honestly, I really felt there was something strange. I sought refuge in God from the devil, got up to work, and even took off my headphones. I was too scared to keep them on. Sure, I work with 4 other men, but in that room, I was completely alone. It was night, and the atmosphere was unsettling, almost unreal. A man had died in that very room, and with no one watching over us, it only made sense that I felt afraid. But what didn't make sense was that while I was working, I would suddenly find myself staring at the wall, focused involuntarily, without any thought or awareness. The feeling of being lost kept growing until I stopped sensing time. I was just standing there, holding the equipment and looking at the wall. How long did I stay like that? I have no idea. As I tried to grasp the moment, I felt as if I had lost my memory. I literally tried to remember my own name, and I swear I had forgotten it. But suddenly the power went out, and I realized I'd been standing in the same spot all along, doing nothing but staring at the wall. Slowly, thoughts began trickling back into my mind, as if memory itself were returning in fragments, piece by piece. The sensation terrified me, but at last I grasped the truth. I was frozen in place. The voices of the workers drifted faintly in the background, but the feeling of disorientation inside me only grew stronger, turning into something disturbingly heavy. And then, my thoughts were torn apart by a piercing sound. More than one cat snarling and clashing violently. The worst part? The cries weren't coming from the street. They were coming from inside the room. Terrified, I clutched my phone, muttered a prayer to push away the darkness, and with trembling fingers managed to turn on the flashlight. The moment I switched it on, the cat's cries vanished, and the room was utterly empty. My coworkers stood there in disbelief, swearing they'd heard the sound coming from inside. They even searched everywhere, yet no one had seen a single cat leave the apartment, and the door had been locked the whole time. "Where are the cats, Ayub?" they asked. I swore I didn't know. I hadn't even seen them. Yes, I'd heard them, but I never saw them. I had no idea what was happening. It was such a strange feeling talking to them. I swear it was like hearing my own voice echoing back, a deep, distant resonance, as if my words turned into nothing but an echo. And from that moment, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I woke up to 4 workers hovering over me, splashing water on my face, trying to bring me back. My right arm burned with pain, from the shoulder all the way down to the very tip of my fingers. Moving it felt like dragging a mountain. "What happened?" I asked. They said I had started speaking without any warning, but something was wrong. My voice came out slow, my eyes wide open, unblinking, frozen. I was talking, but like a broken machine. Too slow, too stiff, too strange. Mid-sentence, my voice twisted. I was speaking as if imitating a cat's meow. Then silence. My eyes were locked wide open, but I wasn't there anymore. They rushed me out, shaking me, calling my name, trying everything for 20 long minutes. Nothing until cold water hit my face. In an instant, I woke, and right then, the wail of an ambulance siren cut through the air. The workers, shaken by what they saw, had already called for help, and even notified the company. I left work that day only to be rushed to the hospital. They ran tests and examined me thoroughly, but everything came back normal, except for the strange pain in my arm. Even after further checks, my arm appeared completely fine. The doctor concluded I must have fallen during the episode and hurt it slightly, but the workers swore I never fell. They insisted I remain standing until they carried me outside and sat me down. The strangest part, I was conscious the whole time, yet I wasn't truly aware of what was happening around me. That day, I decided to take a break, hoping some rest would ease the strange feeling gnawing at me. Yet all throughout, I was haunted by a sense of being lost. Adrift in a fog I couldn't explain. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion from work. Nothing more. Relieved, I closed my eyes, certain everything was perfectly normal. But the moment I drifted into sleep, I found myself back at the workplace, inside the very same room. I was holding the tools in my hands, standing before the wall where the man from the apartment had died. A bizarre dream, an unsettling sensation. I glanced through the window, the world outside drowned in shadows. It's as if I'm standing in the dead of night, watching the occasional car drift past the street below. Strange, isn't it? I kept whispering, what a strange dream, but then came the dreadful realization as I stood there, rooted to the spot. I knew beyond doubt I was dreaming. In the pitch black room, I sensed movement. I glanced back and there he was, an elderly man, a stream of dark, tar-like fluid slipping from his lips as his eyes locked onto mine. His appearance was horrifying, yet disturbingly close to human, just very old. His form struck fear into me, its decayed flesh mottled with mold. Though the room lay in shadows, the dim glow from the window exposed him with chilling clarity. He stood motionless, silent, while I watched, trapped between terror and the desperate hope that this dream would finally be over. But the seconds kept slipping away, and time itself seemed to freeze with me stuck in the same position. I climbed down the ladder I usually use at work, my eyes fixed on the man as I tried to leave the room, only to realize his gaze followed me with every step. A sudden wave of panic and shock hit me. I screamed, stumbled backward, and bolted from the apartment, terrified, racing down the street until it struck me. This was no dream, it was real. A passing driver pulled over and tried to calm me down. My screams drew out a few people, whispering prayers under their breath, asking what exactly had happened. That's when it hit me. I wasn't dreaming after all, but how I ended up in that place, I had no clue. All I knew was this: what I saw in that apartment was real. God knows best. One of the neighbors called the police, telling them I had been screaming in the street, terrified out of my mind. The officers showed up, already convinced I must be insane. I tried to explain everything, what had happened, who I worked for, and that I was just an employee at that company. But the truth was simpler. The darkness and fear overwhelmed me, and I broke down screaming. The real question was, why was I working alone? And why was I working at all when the company was supposed to shut down after midnight? I had no answer. So the police sent me straight to the hospital, suspecting I wasn't in my right mind. My family was called, and when they arrived at the hospital, they were completely shocked because, as far as they knew, I had been sleeping soundly in my own bed at that very moment. The doctors ran a special brain scan, but everything came back perfectly normal. Even the home security cameras had captured me literally walking out of the house. My family could only explain it as sleepwalking, but there was another possibility. The black mold might have affected me in some mysterious way. The incident was unsettling enough that the company issued an order requiring all employees at that site to wear special masks due to possible side effects from the mold. As for me, I was removed from the assignment altogether for fear my health might deteriorate. And truly, it felt like the best paid vacation, 15 whole days off. But the strangeness of the story didn't end there. During those 2 weeks, I kept suffering from the same pain in my right hand, along with this unsettling sense of being lost, of drifting. More than once, I'd take my bike out for a ride, hoping for a change of scenery, only to find myself, without realizing how, standing in front of the same building. Eventually, I decided not to go out again until the vacation was over, and that's exactly what I did. Thanks be to God, once we finished working on those apartments owned by the old man, we moved on to a different site. The unsettling feeling vanished, the pain in my hands disappeared, and everything returned to normal. But when I told my friend Omar what had happened, he insisted I meet the man who had told him the story of the apartment's owner and described to him the strange figure I had seen that day. And here's the shock, my friend. It wasn't the same man. Look, you might assume it was the apartment owner, not me. I know most of you guessed that, but he insisted it wasn't. What I saw, only God knows. Maybe it was him, maybe not. My description wasn't precise. My whole impression rests on a few things. The darkness, my fragile state of mind, and the fear I was feeling then. Still, the whole thing is strange. Even if I did imagine some parts, how did I hear cats in the room? And how did the workers hear them too? If you have an explanation for this, drop it in the comments. The final story comes from Ayub, a soldier from Baghdad, Iraq. He recalls being stationed in the border town of Trabil in 2020. Right on the Iraqi-Jordanian frontier, as the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world and borders everywhere began to close. Orders came down, leave schedules were reshuffled, and duty hours grew longer. It meant that a single soldier would remain on duty for an entire month without a single day off. Only then would he be granted a full month of leave. The rule was introduced to reduce the number of guards on duty and to cut the risk of spreading the virus from a soldier to his family, or from his family back to him. And in fact, the number of border guards was sharply reduced at that time. I was stationed at my post alongside several other guards, all sharing the same place. Back then, I reached an agreement with my friends and even the officer in charge that we would build a special place just for prayer. To my surprise, everyone welcomed the idea. Before long, construction tools arrived and a large room took shape, set aside solely for worship. It was built on the very outskirts of the camp, right beside the military sleeping quarters, no more than 10 meters away from the main command post. That little room became our place of prayer. Sometimes, if we were lucky, a nearby Wi-Fi signal would reach us, and we'd linger there, browsing the web. The catch was that the room was always shrouded in darkness. We never installed lights, on purpose. We didn't want it turning into a hangout for the guards, a spot where they'd sit scrolling endlessly. It had to remain what it was meant to be, a room for prayer, nothing more, nothing less, and only in the daylight hours. The only source of light came from the room's door, left slightly open so daylight could spill in. At night, the guards' bedrooms provided the glow, along with a few faint external lights. There was also a small window beside the door, letting in just a hint of light. One night I couldn't sleep and struggled with insomnia. I thought, instead of wasting time, why not pray the night vigil and earn some reward? Then maybe I could finally rest. So I performed ablution, opened my room door, wedged a stone behind it so it wouldn't close, and entered to pray aloud, loudly, just as I always do. The moment I read Al-Fatiha, the door slammed shut with full force. Even though there was supposed to be a stone blocking it, the room grew dim, the only light coming from the window. I thought maybe a draft had caused it, so I closed the door and continued my prayer. Then I noticed movement in the room, as if more than one person had entered. They stopped just behind me, barely a few steps away. I could sense there were 5 of them, and soon you'll know how I figured out their number. Naturally, these guards could have come even at such a late hour, but I swear they're shadows. Or perhaps it was just my imagination, stretched along the wall in an incredible way. To clarify, the room's door was behind me and the wall was in front, so the shadow appeared right before my eyes. That's when I realized there were 5 of them, standing just a short distance behind me, maybe a meter and a half. Maybe it's natural for a shadow to grow long, yet they stood just a step behind me, and my shadow cast on the wall ahead, it seemed to vanish, insignificant next to theirs. The shocking part was that I was praying while they were just standing there, completely motionless, not praying at all. Even then I felt uneasy, but I reassured myself because I was standing in prayer. By God's protection, I finished my prayer while they remained frozen in the exact same spot, barely moving, just subtle shifts I could catch from the shadow on the wall in front of me. When I finished, I stood still, preparing to leave, and glanced back to see who these 5 people really were. The shock was unbearable. The room was entirely empty. Confused, I turned to look at the wall where the shadow had been, and I couldn't believe what I saw. The shadows of 5 people were still there, subtly shifting. I scanned the room again. Empty. Nothing that could possibly explain the shadow's form, yet right there in plain sight, the silhouettes of 5 people lingered, frozen yet strangely alive, cast against the wall. I whispered God's name and sought refuge from the devil. The chill that hit me was so powerful, it stopped me dead in my tracks. I crept to the door, opened it, and fled, shocked beyond belief by what I had just seen. And then I realized this wasn't the first time. Other guards had experienced the same thing, in the dead of night, alone in that room, just scrolling on their phones. That day, and another day, up until this very moment, it was the first and last time I ever prayed the night prayer. Actually, I had been moved to another place, yet even now, I still remember every detail of the shadow I saw on the wall. I have no explanation for what I witnessed that day. If you happen to have any, I'd love for you to share it. And if your explanation is that someone might have been standing outside and the light cast their shadow into the room, I must tell you, there was absolutely no one, inside or outside, so there's no physical reflection that could create the image of 5 people on the wall in front of me. So was the room really empty? Only God knows. But one thing's for sure, if you hop onto the channel and hit subscribe, all the previous episodes will pop up for you. Turn on the notification bell and share the videos, and you'll catch the upcoming episodes that you won't hear about anywhere else on YouTube. And since you found my Instagram, follow it to get a glimpse of my life beyond YouTube. I'm Ahmed. Goodbye. The sense of confusion was only getting stronger. Who was banging into the wall above, or this one? If it was the wall above, then it's fine. But if it's this wall, that would mean he got irritated by my noise. And then he might complain. If nothing goes wrong, great. But if something does, oh boy. Trouble comes from every direction. The police might show up saying, no more filming at night, okay? Or they might come with a fine for disturbing the neighbors. Or they might not come at all. If the police show up for the first reason, just stop filming and continue the next morning. If they come for the second reason, you'll have to pay the fine, sign a statement at night, and then shoot on the third morning. Because the second reason always comes with a fine. But if the police don't show up at all, well, that opens up a whole new set of possibilities. You can record and even make your voice loud and the neighbors won't get bothered. You can also just speak normally and let yourself sink into the story's vibe. But here's the twist. There's more than one way this can go. If you record in a scary, creepy tone, that's perfect. But if you keep going with your normal voice, well, that opens up a whole other set of possibilities. The neighbors might get annoyed and call the cops, which brings us back to square one. Or maybe they won't complain at all. Either way, you can keep going. Let's be real, this case literally has no end.